How's everybody doing tonight? Oh, there we go. Hey, there's a pretty lady. It's all good. You had to pick up our son from high school, wrestling, something like that. He's trying to be cool. How's everybody doing tonight? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Get some excitement in here. Glad you guys are here. Since everybody's kind of over here, I'm gonna move just like this. Tonight we're going to be continuing our series through Ruth, through the book of Ruth. I thought this was going to be our last message in Ruth tonight. Getting some feedback there. Thought this was going to be our last message in Ruth, but after uncovering some interesting information about Proverbs 31 and how it is very probable that it was written about Ruth, I decided that I would add an extra week next week, and we will be looking at Proverbs 31 as it was likely written to Ruth, and if it wasn't, we'll be able to, as we have the last 4 weeks, look at how Ruth exemplified and lived out that of a Proverbs 31 woman. And don't worry, ladies, I will have some information for the fellas in your life next week to make sure that I'm being equally yoked here. I've been married for 17 years, okay? I can help it out there. All right, so it'll be good. Also, want to let you guys know, if you have missed any of the series and you would like to catch up and hear it, they are all now up on YouTube at Valley Baptist Young Adults. All right, and it'll have the blue Valley Baptist V there, and it'll have the series of Ruth, and as soon as I can, I will get this message uploaded there as well. I'm also working on making a podcast form of that somehow. I'm still learning all that, so that way you guys can just put it on the podcast and just listen to sermons in your car, or however that works. I'm still trying to figure that out. But anyway, so next week I will be preaching again on continuing this series on Proverbs 31. The 2 weeks after that, I'm on vacation, so Monty will be preaching, and then we will see where we will go from there after I get back from vacation. With that, let's get into our story for tonight. Ruth chapter 4. We left off last week on quite the cliffhanger. All right? Ruth had gone to Boaz and basically said, "Redeem me, make me your wife. Let's do this. Let's make it happen." And Boaz is like, "Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm going to do it. However, there's this other guy that's closer in relation to you than me. And so if he's going, or he wants to redeem it, then I'll let him redeem it. But if not, don't worry, I'll redeem it." And so Ruth goes home to Naomi, and there's probably a little bit of worry as she's talking to Naomi. And Naomi finishes the chapter by telling her, wait until you see how things play out. He is going to not rest until this matter is resolved. And that's exactly what Boaz did. Boaz, after Ruth had left and went into town, he went into town. He left his harvest on the threshing floor. And yes, he left it with some servants, but he left it and he went and he sat at the gate. He didn't know when this closer redeemer would come, so he goes and he parks it at the gate, and he is waiting for this guy to show up. Shortly thereafter, this closer redeemer comes walking up to the gate, and Boaz goes, hey, come here. Come take a seat with me. I have something to tell you. So the guy comes over and takes a seat. Boaz then gathers 10 witnesses or elders of the city. The city gate is kind of like the courthouse. That's where you did all of your major business. And so he brings these 10 guys in as was required by the law. And so he sits down and they begin talking. And Boaz throws out a pretty attractive offer. He looks at him and he says, Naomi, who's returned from Moab, most of your texts probably say that she is selling her land, but this word, when you look at it in the original language, is more like she's putting it up. She's offering it up for redemption. So basically, he's saying, Naomi, she's back. She's offering all of Elimelech's land up to be redeemed. So you need to go redeem it. He didn't give him an option. He said, you need to go redeem it. And we'll find out why a little bit later. So he says, you need to go redeem it. And the guy goes, all right, I'll do it. And it's like, wait, what? No, this can't be happening. Boaz and Ruth are supposed to get together. They've set this whole thing up, and now this bozo is going to come in and ruin the whole love story, right? Wrong. Because Boaz had a trick up his sleeve. Now, he was intentional with the way he offered it. He offered it that way because he didn't want there to be any doubt. Because if he would have come up and just said, hey, you need to redeem Naomi's land and marry Ruth the or you need to marry Ruth the Moabitess to redeem her and Naomi, and the guy goes, no, I'm not going to do that. And then Boaz goes out, he marries her, and all of a sudden he ends up with Elimelech's land. This guy might be, wait a minute, you didn't tell me that. And there might be some sort of conflict between them. So he laid it out there clean to let him know what the best part of the offer was, at least in this kinsman's case. And then Boaz drops the bomb. And he says, on the day you redeem the land, you will also take Ruth the Moabitess as your wife. And we don't know how long between these two statements it took. But shortly thereafter, the closest kinsman said, I cannot redeem this. He says, I cannot redeem it myself, or it will ruin my own inheritance. Take my right to redemption because I can't redeem it. And it was tradition that in order to pass the redemption on to the next, you would take off your sandal and you would hand it to him. And you would give it to him as a sign of, hey, this is now yours. You can redeem it. And so Boaz gets that sandal, and he looks at those 10 witnesses, and he goes, you all are witnesses. You saw he gave me his right to redeem. So I will redeem the land of Naomi and Elimelech, and I will take Ruth as my wife. Yes, it's happening. I've been waiting for 3 weeks. It's happening. All right? And he gets excited. And they all say, yes, we are witnesses, and we agree that this has come upon you. And they spoke blessings upon him. They said, may Ruth be like Leah and Rachel. And the idea behind that was that she would provide him with many heirs and many children. Leah and Rachel are the mothers of Israel. The nation, their husband was Israel. It's confusing. Just bear with me, all right? They had 9 kids, then their maids had a few other kids that made the 12 tribes of Israel. So the idea was that he would have many tribes. They also said that they would pray blessings upon him, that he would have a well-known name, meaning Boaz, in his deeds, the good deeds that he had done. And finally, they said, we pray a blessing that your house will become as strong like Perez. And Perez is his ancestor. Perez has started this amazing heritage that led up to Boaz, and is probably the reason that Boaz was such a follower of Christ, and he exemplified God's hesed amongst everybody he came a part of, was because of his spiritual heritage. And I'm sure that after all of this was said and it was done, Boaz took that sandal, and if this was a movie, he'd go running and they'd have some kind of music montage of him playing as he runs through the streets of Bethlehem, comes up to the door, pounds on the door, and then he stands there holding that sandal in his hands. Ruth and Naomi open the door. The music is playing. It's slow motion. Everything's great. And he's holding the sandal, and they see it, and they start jumping up and down, and they embrace, and it's wonderful, and it's great. We don't know if that's in the story, but I thought it'd be fun. But he goes and he takes Ruth as his wife. All right? He goes and takes her as his wife. And it says that he lies with her. And God blesses her and allows her to conceive. Now this is amazing. You have to remember, she was married for 10 years and never conceived a child. So this is a blessing from God. And one of the big themes in Scripture is whenever something big is about to happen, there is a woman who could not conceive, who conceives a miraculous child. All right? It happens all throughout Scripture. And it's that picture of the miraculous birth of Jesus. And here it is. Here is another miraculous birth that will lead to the birth of King David. So she has this baby. The women who are friends with Naomi are just like out of their minds. I mean, I know how ladies get when babies are born. These guys were over the top of even that. All right? And they came up to Naomi and they were partying. They were jumping up and down. They were saying, praying blessings that the Lord gave her a redeemer, someone to take her husband's name. They said, well, may he become well known in Israel. May he renew your life and make you young again. And then they said probably the greatest compliment ever. You have the greatest daughter-in-law ever. She's better than 7 sons. Okay, got to remember something here. Back then, a woman was only worth half a man. Okay, I know that sounds bad. So that meant that she was awesome. Like, that's probably the biggest compliment you could give anybody. And she was her daughter-in-law. So all of these amazing things happen. And then Naomi takes this young baby, places it in his lap, becomes his nanny. And all of the women cheered and sang praises that God had granted a son born to Naomi. They named him Obed, and he became the father of Jesse, and Jesse became the father of David. And in the last 5 verses, we get to the true meaning of this passage, of this whole book. We just went through 4 chapters, and it could have really just been summed up in 5 verses. The whole point of Ruth is to establish the lineage of David, to set up the Davidic kingdom that would lead to Jesus. And it says, I'm going to read these names because they're funny. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Abinadab. Abinadab fathered Nishan. Nishan fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. The whole point of this book is to get us to that last name. And how fitting that the next book is Samuel. And a few chapters into Samuel, we see that David is anointed king. It's beautiful how these were written and placed in the exact order they needed to be. But tonight, as we finish up chapter 4 of Ruth and we move to Proverbs 31 next week, I want us to look at the blessings of the Redeemer and how Ruth was blessed, Naomi was blessed, how Boaz was blessed, how we are blessed by our Redeemer, and even how I want to look at how the kinsman Redeemer missed out on his blessing. So tonight I want to start with this. I want to start about the comparatives between Boaz and our Redeemer in Jesus. The first point is Boaz left the harvest to take on a foreigner. This is huge. I don't think we quite understand it. He left his entire harvest, his entire fortune for the year, how he was going to make a living. Yes, he left it with his servants, but he left it and he went and sat at a gate, and he didn't know when this guy was going to come. It could have been that day. It could have been 2 days. Could have been 3 days. We don't know. But he left, and he went. And here's why. The Redeemer not only needed the ability, meaning having the funds to redeem the family, they also had to have the desire and the willingness. His willingness and his desire was shown by his commitment to leave and drop everything he was doing and come and wait until the situation had been resolved and until Ruth and Naomi were redeemed. And here's the deal. If it wasn't him, he was still going to do all of the work. If this other kinsman redeemer had chosen that and said, I'm going to redeem him, it wouldn't matter. He wasn't going to rest until the deal was settled and they were taken care of. Because he had not only the ability, but he had the desire and the willingness. And at the same time, Jesus did the same for us. He left his throne room. He left where he lived, where he was staying, where he was safe. He came down here to take on flesh so that he could be our blood relative, so that he could redeem us. And we can't underestimate the main similarity, not between Boaz and Jesus, but between Ruth and us. We are foreigners to God. We are enemies of God because of our sin and our sin nature. And He can't even stand to look at us. He can't even stand to see who we are because of how evil we are and how our sin separates us from His holiness. But in spite of all of that, He had the ability and the willingness. So He left and became flesh so that He could redeem us. Ruth was freed from her cultural and marital bonds. She was no longer a foreigner. She was no longer a widow. We are saved from the bondage of our sin and from the bondage of Satan. When Adam and Eve sinned, we gave up the land, the earth, to somebody else. We gave it up to somebody else. And that person was Satan. He took over the world. He rules the world. And God is coming back to redeem it. To make it whole again. And set us free. And redeem us spiritually. And that connection is one that cannot be missed. And that's why I wanted to start with it. But now, what about the kinsman redeemer? What about the one who is closer? Our second faith lesson tonight is this. What's in a name? You see, the closer kinsman had the ability. He wanted to buy the land, but he didn't have the desire or the willingness to save or to redeem them. Let me ask you this. What was the Redeemer's name? What was this closer kinsman's name? Anybody know? Good, because neither do I. Because it's not listed. We only know him as the closer relative, the family redeemer that's closer. And what we see is we watch him push away his responsibility. Boaz presented the land in the most attractive way, made it hard to resist. He told them, you need to redeem it, because if you don't, I am. And then he throws Ruth in there. Now here's the deal. This wasn't like a super easy thing to do. If someone came to you and asked them to redeem you, and you said no, there was law that was taking place that had to go in. I mentioned the sandal. And in this case, they seem to have lost some of its, some of it may have got lost in translation. But here's how this worked. When the law was originally written, if you refused, you took off your sandal, you gave it to the person you were giving it to, and he spits in your face. Serious. Spits in your face, and you are deemed unclean for about a week or two until you can be ritually cleaned. So for him to do this, and for him to reject redeeming Naomi and Ruth, was a big deal. Like, it wasn't just a little simple, like, oh, here's my sandal, take it and go. He was making a big choice. And he gives us the reason why. He says, I do this because I don't want to ruin my inheritance. And I get it. I understand. All right? He's thinking there for a while. Okay, look, I'm probably an older guy. If I marry Ruth, number one, she's a Moabite. That's a horrible thing. Number two, what if we only have one child? My one descendant will be half Moabite. And that'll just mess up everything. My inheritance, my ancestry, my lineage, all of that will be messed up because I have this filth in my bloodline. The other thing he's probably thinking is, well, if we only have one child, he is the redeemer for Elimelech. He's going to be the one who takes Elimelech's name and his land. So if we only have one, then my name can get lost in the shuffle. So there are some serious consequences that this guy has. And so he decides, you know what? I would rather be spat in the face and be humiliated for a week than to marry a Moabite woman. That's basically what he's saying. Why? Because I don't want to mess up my my lineage. I don't want to mess up my inheritance or my lineage. Now here's what's ironic. He was so concerned about his lineage that he gave up and missed out on being a part of the greatest blessing, the greatest inheritance, and the greatest legacy of anyone. He could have been the grandpa of King David. He could have been in the lineage of the greatest Redeemer in Jesus. But yet he gave it up for selfish reasons. It's crazy. It's ironic. But I'm glad he did, because it would have ruined the love story. But he missed out on the greatest blessing. But what about those who remained faithful? What about those that we've been following for the last 4 weeks? You had Ruth, you had Boaz, and you had Naomi. Ruth and Boaz, they were faithful to God all along. It was great. Ruth left her people. She followed her mother-in-law. She left her gods. She put her faith in the one true God. And out of it, she was rewarded with blessings of a godly husband. She finally was able to conceive as a blessing from God and had a son. And I mentioned this earlier, but I can't underestimate this. 10 years she was barren. 10 years she couldn't have a child. So this was a miracle child. It sets up the story of David and his lineage and the Davidic covenant that is coming, just like all of the other unique and miraculous births set up major storylines in the Bible. But here's the other thing. God's providence is seen in this. It's seen hugely. If she would have conceived a child with her first husband, Mahlon, she would not have been eligible to be redeemed, because she had an heir. She had somebody there. And we would have just gotten 5 verses of the lineage of David. And it was through God's providence, and it may not have seemed that way. Her main function was to produce children. And for 10 years she wasn't able to do it. And as hard as that may have been, God had a plan. God's providence used her barrenness to allow this redemption story to be told. It's beautiful how God's sovereignty works out, even when we think it's a disaster. Boaz had a great spiritual heritage from Perez all the way down. He was a man of hesed. He showed kindness and love to everyone, and he was blessed with a godly woman. He was up in age. All the records indicate that he had not been married before. So his inability to get married seems like a curse, but yet God's providence used it to tell this beautiful story. And out of it, he was blessed with a godly woman. He was blessed with a child, a son to continue his name. And of course, both of them were added to the lineage of Jesus. They were grandparents to the greatest king in Israel's history, perhaps the greatest king in the world. And they were the ancestors of Jesus. What an amazing blessing. But here's the unique blessing. Naomi. When we began this story, Naomi was a bitter old woman, right? Call me Mara. I am bitter. God has done this to me. And she had turned her back on God. But yet now, blessings is poured out. Her heart softened. Her faith was renewed. And a child was born. And it all happened through her daughter-in-law, who was better than 7 sons. And it was through Ruth's faith that Naomi's heart began to soften. And this shows us a very important point. God never left Naomi, even though she left him. God never left Naomi, even though she departed from him. She left the country. She went to a foreign land. She had nothing but death and famine in her wake. She lost her husband, her sons. She was abandoned by one of her daughters. All she was left with was Ruth. She was a bitter old lady, frustrated, mad at God. And I wonder how many of us, when life is hitting us hard, when life is so difficult, how many of us wonder, did God leave me? That's the way Naomi felt. God abandoned me. He took all of my good stuff. He got rid of it all. He abandoned me. I wonder how many of us feel that God has left us. Well, here's the truth. God never left Naomi. God was right there. She had a beautiful example in her daughter-in-law Ruth. And it took time to be there. It took time for her to figure it out. He never left her. And so I would say to you who have been in those times, or when you reach those times and you don't know how you're going to get out and you feel like God has just left me before. He has just left me and He's gone and there's nothing left. Maybe you need to check which direction you're headed in. Because maybe He's right there and you're just looking in the wrong spot. Ruth was looking everywhere but at Ruth. Maybe you just need to examine where you're looking and see what God is providing so that you can realize He never left. Naomi was finally able to see that. And now she's the great grandmother to a king. She has a child that can restore her family, but this child didn't just restore her family. This child would be a blessing that would save the world. And that brings me to our last faith lesson of the night and the importance of spiritual heritage. Hopefully you've picked up on the theme, as I've mentioned it several times this evening, about the heritage of Boaz and of Ruth. Boaz had a strong heritage of Israelite men who followed God and who probably trained him up. Naomi, not so much. She grew up in a land that was an enemy to God, that worshipped other gods. And yet, she put her faith in the one true God. This whole book is about the godly heritage of King David and Jesus. But there's something else interesting. We see Ruth, right? Ruth is a Moabite. She's not an Israelite. Does anybody know who Boaz's mom was? Rahab. That's right. Rahab. If you flip to Matthew, or I'll flip there and I'll read it to you. Matthew chapter 1, verse 5, it says this. Here comes these funny names. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz by Rahab. Boaz fathered Obed by Ruth. Obed fathered Jesse. Jesse fathered King David. So in this lineage of Jesus, there are two women. One of them is a Moabite who is a people group that came from an incestuous relationship between Lot and his daughter, who got him drunk and slept with him and had a son named Moab. Rahab is from Jericho. She's not an Israelite. She was a prostitute and owned a brothel. But she put her faith in God and became part of His family. Jesus' grandparents, David's grandparents, were not Jews, they were Gentiles. But they were Gentiles that put their faith in God and changed their spiritual heritage. Because here's the truth. Your spiritual heritage doesn't determine your salvation. Your spiritual heritage doesn't determine your salvation. Sure, it helps. We can see that in Boaz's case. Guys, I have a great spiritual heritage, and I don't say that to brag. I say it to hopefully prove a point. But I have a great spiritual heritage. All right? 7 generations ago, I had a great-great-great-great-grandfather. His name was Henry Bowe. And if that name sounds familiar, it should, because that is the name of my youngest son. In fact, I have a picture of the two of them together. You throw that up there for me? There you go. That's Henry Bowe, my son, with his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, Henry Bowe. They're spelled exactly the same. Okay? Leave that picture up there for a few minutes. And 7 generations ago, Henry Bowe, on his deathbed, prayed for the next 7 generations to be raised in godly families and that they would hopefully come and trust Christ. I am the 6th. Henry Bowe and Tyson are the 7th. It is my opportunity and my privilege to get to pray on my deathbed for the next 7 generations. If you want something even crazier, look at the day Henry Bowe was born. December 15th, 1822. The 7th generation, the first person in that generation is a boy by the name of Tyson Allen Burr, and he was born on December 15th, 2005. I didn't make it up, it just happened that way. But I have this great spiritual heritage that we can see God waved in and out. And every male in my family has heard that. And they've heard of this great heritage and this spiritual blessing that has been passed down from generation to generation. But I can tell you this. Not all of my cousins, not all of my family members have chosen to follow Jesus. A spiritual heritage is great. It makes it easy sometimes to live up to and to follow because you have great examples. But that's not what saved me. That's not what saves us. We have to make an individual decision. And so maybe you have a great spiritual heritage, but you've been running from it. You're tired of it. But you're here tonight and you go, you know what? It's time to change that. It's time to join that spiritual heritage that is part of your family. It'll be the greatest decision you ever make. But maybe tonight you're sitting here and you're like, Luke, I have none of that. I've got nothing. My parents hated God. They were atheists. They were agnostic, whatever it is. They have nothing to do with it. Maybe tonight you haven't trusted Jesus yet, but you're sitting there and you're just like, I don't have this heritage that you're talking about, so why would I add to it? Well, maybe you don't need to add to it, but maybe it needs to start with you. Maybe you're like Rahab and Ruth, where you're going to start a new lineage, start a new spiritual heritage that can...